Hello everyone, and welcome to the 115th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Injidaka Erik Killmonger Stevens from the Black Panther series. For those of you who have been waiting for this video, you can thank one of my patrons, Sean Harris, who kindly informed me that February 16th, 2023 would mark the 5-year anniversary of Black Panther's release, and he thought it would be appropriate to release a video on Erik on the same date, and clearly I agreed. Erik is a fantastic villain with a great arc, a man denied his birthright who is forced to endure trauma and hardship in his youth, which evolves into a mirror of the hatred that runs through every fiber of his being. In this video, we're going to cover all of Erik's person and actions in this film series, and as some of you may already be used to, we won't be covering any of Erik's appearances in any other stories in this video, as he is a much different person in the comics and elsewhere than he is in this story. But as always, if you'd like to see any videos on other versions of Erik, let me know down below, and I might cover those versions of him in the future. So, without further ado, let's explore the tragic story of Erik Killmonger. Born Injidaka to Prince Njobu of Wakanda and an unknown American woman, Injidaka was given the name Erik Stevens, his last name presumably taken from his mother, and he was raised as your average African-American kid in Oakland, California during the late 80s and 90s. Except, there isn't too much that's average about Oakland, as depending on which part of it you live in, it's one of the most unforgiving environments in the United States, especially during this time period. Gang violence, poverty, and crime in general was and is a fact of life for people living in Oakland, and being raised in such an environment can harden you as much as it scars you. This becomes ever more true when you find one of your parents with claws through their chest in your home, and when another is absent from your life due to wrongful incarceration. But the young Erik was given at least one blessing: tales of the magnificence of his father's homeland and the wonders that he would see there when he visited it with him someday. This was his inheritance, and his nourishment were the streets of Oakland and his father's views that he developed while serving as a war dog. Forced to come to terms with the reality that the world outside of Wakanda was not such a bright and sunny place for people of African descent, Njobu became disillusioned with his people's isolationist policies, and instead desired to help the oppressed cast off their oppressors by providing them with vibranium weapons, tools that would allow them to take down anyone who stood in their way, and Wakanda would be there to oversee it all, emerging as the dominant power of a new world that they created. And it was in his father's personal effects where Injidaka learned of these plans and thus made them his own. All these elements, growing up in a perilous environment, tales of the promised land, radicalization at home, and betrayal at the hands of his own family, all molded the young Injidaka into a person who was very much an echo of his father ideologically, but who was a much different person overall. A vengeful, hate-fueled ideologue who would dedicate his life to righting the wrongs not just against his own family, but those made against his people by the colonizers who oppressed them for centuries. With a firm goal in mind for his future, Erik would point all his efforts toward achieving that goal, and he excelled at every level of school, graduating from the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis at 19 and moving on to MIT for grad school, after which he would hone his body and combat skills for the task ahead by joining the Navy SEALs and shipping out to Afghanistan, where he would become one of the deadliest killers in the U.S. military's employ, a man who would kill whenever he was given the chance, a propensity towards death that earned him the nickname Killmonger. Erik would go on to join a JSOC unit, and he traveled to different corners of the world to destabilize governments and assassinate high-level targets. And after putting his time in here, he graduated to being a mercenary for hire. However, this mercenary wasn't interested in simply killing for money. He was always working towards achieving his aforementioned goal, which of course brought him into contact with Ulysses Claw, the man whom his father worked with to help smuggle out vibranium from Wakanda decades past. This Erik, forged by years of training and hardship, presents himself to us as an extremely confident man, one whose body language is firm and unyielding in the face of any danger, and this man with dozens, if not over 100 scars on his body proving his deadliness, is one who is far more menacing than any other trained killer, as he has the intellectual fortitude to make his grand designs a reality, and he succeeds in doing so for a time. But what adds to the ferocity of his intellect and training is his emotional intelligence, or rather his lack thereof, as from the few details we're given in this film regarding his personality, we can discern that Erik is likely suffering from antisocial personality disorder, and he could be labeled a sociopath. There are three things in particular that allow us to make this distinction, the first being his ability to kill so many people without much thought put into the matter, but the other two are much more personal: his murder of his girlfriend Linda and the initial reaction he has to his father's death when he was a child. His murder of his girlfriend is significant because he shows absolutely no emotion when he murders her, not even showing remorse after he incapacitates Claw, which indicates that Erik has developed a lack of empathy, and his answer to his father's question as to why he shed no tears for him. That being, everybody dies, it's just life around here, would be enough evidence to back up that claim, as it would appear that the harsh environment that Erik was exposed to caused him to develop this disorder. However, Erik does shed a tear when he's speaking with his father on the ancestral plane, which could mean that he doesn't have this disorder, but showing emotion doesn't necessarily mean you aren't a sociopath. And if I had to make my best guess, I would assume that he is, especially when you take into consideration his plan for Wakanda's weapons. After he's taken the throne from T'Challa, Erik immediately orders that Wakandan weapons be sent to their war dogs all across the world so they can give them to the oppressed African descendants that inhabit those countries and kill their oppressors. And when he gives this order, he makes sure to include that they'll be killing their children as well, which tells us that he doesn't plan to have his forces kill just soldiers or heads of government, but entire populations, massacring everyone save for African descendants, so they might have complete control over the world, with Wakanda standing tall above them to oversee its fruition. And if that plan doesn't make you a sociopath, I'm not sure what else does. One thing that's interesting to note about this plan is that Erik puts forth the notion that everything he's trying to do is for the oppressed, to bring justice to the colonizers and right the wrongs of the past so the world can be cleansed and healed. But when it comes down to it, Erik is only pursuing this dark path for revenge and to quell the hatred that burns inside of him. When he's fighting with T'Challa in the mound, Erik chastises him for hiding in safety while his people suffered, and T'Challa responds that Erik has become just like the people he hates and that he'll destroy the world. And Erik's reply to this tells us all that we need to know. The world took everything from me, everything that I loved, and I'm going to make sure that we're even. And here now we're shown that this man who was exposed to hardship and horror as a boy has never been able to move past his hatred, and as a result, we're given a bloodthirsty king who's destroyed any chance of his legacy continuing with the destruction of the heart-shaped herb, who has formulated a half-baked plan that could lead to the destruction of the entire world. As though Wakanda is powerful, and their weapons even more so, the world is a big place, and the odds of Erik's plan succeeding were slim to none when you consider that the world and all its various peoples, with all their various powers at their disposal, would have never just lain down and let Wakanda rule the world. Especially when you consider that in this universe, there's a number of superheroes who would have been more than happy to stop Erik. Mass and institutional violence is a cycle, and as long as it continues, it will never stop. Maybe you could stop it with violence if you were some divine being who was capable of wiping out every single one of their enemies. But if you aren't, not a single person or organization ever achieved total victory over their enemy. And no matter how hard you try, you will never be able to erase the pain inflicted upon you or your people by attempting to reflect it back upon them. Perhaps you'll win for a time, but as long as there are people left alive to remember you and what you've done to them or their loved ones, you will never truly be secure in your power, and your vengeance will follow you like a plague for the rest of your life. Even on an individual level, revenge is never the answer, as it consumes your very person and turns you into a corrupted version of yourself, a person who sacrifices everything they were in an attempt to stop their pain. But the pain will never stop. There will never be a time in your life when there aren't moments where those you hate and what they've done to you come back to haunt you. But the pain will grow less with time, and you will heal as much as you're able to if you allow yourself to be healed. In J'daka, Erik Stevens, Killmonger, he never allowed himself to heal. He only picked at his wounds until they had festered into an uncontrollable void of agony. Are there countless wrongs that have been committed against innocent people by those in power over the long course of our history? Yes, absolutely. And none of them can be excused. If we want these to be painful memories hidden in the past, we have to stop. And maybe one day we will. And perhaps the one good thing that Erik did was help T'Challa realize that he did indeed need to offer Wakanda's help to the world, but not by helping them to atone for their sins with violence, but by just helping them. Thankfully, Erik was stopped, and he died gazing upon the sunset his father had promised him, a fierce warrior and proud soul whose essence melded with the Wakandan sunset as he rejected the bondage offered to him by his enemy. But just as the memories of the wrongs committed against countless people are still alive and well today, the spirit of Erik Killmonger will live on for the rest of eternity, etched into the history of the nation he sought to rule, and in the mark he left on Wakandan society. And much like the marks that were left on him, these will never truly heal, and were shown this 9 years later when Shuri undergoes the process of becoming the Black Panther, and through his influence and memory, she almost succumbs to her own desire for vengeance and nearly dooms her people, as Erik almost had. This is the legacy of Killmonger, a legacy of death and destruction that will serve as a reminder to any who might be feeling the same pain that he once felt, of what harm they can cause and what they can achieve should they allow themselves to succumb to the darkness within ascend them, and only time will tell if one such person appears to follow in the abyssal footsteps of this pretender Panther. So in the end, what is there to say about Injidaka Erik Killmonger Stevens? He was a child who was forced to endure trauma and hardship, one that evolved into a man who would expand his father's violent ideas and mold them into his own designs for retribution and world domination. In the process, countless lives were expended due to his influence, including the many unknown people he killed during his time as a soldier and mercenary, Zuri, and a number of other Wakandans who died fighting in the battle between T'Challa and Erik. And perhaps there were a good many people that Erik killed as a soldier and mercenary who deserved it. However, the latter group did not deserve to suffer due to his influence, and had Erik not aspired to usurp the throne and conquer the world, many Wakandan lives could have been spared. Erik is above all a tragic figure, one who was abandoned to his hatred and thus evolved into the monster that we see in this film. It didn't have to be this way. Had Erik had some positive influence in his life, had his family not abandoned him after murdering his father, perhaps things would have turned out different for an Injidaka raised in Wakanda. But we'll never know. All we know now is that Erik was pushed into becoming the man known as Killmonger, a man crafted by the wrongs committed against his people and himself, one that could not resist the evil that was allowed to grow unchecked within him. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Killmonger? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you liked this video, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, to my patrons, and to anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.